my time in Richmond, Virginia, set up this kind of structure to be able to honor the will of the states in which these systems resided, but at the same time recognizing the federal requirements that went with accepting federal funding. And so the structure you see in front of you is is what we set up here in Charlotte and similar across the nation in states that have similar situations. So you'll see on the left, CATS as a government entity, as a city department, had to set up a contractual relationship with a management company. At this time, that management company is RATP Dev. But when I first got here in 2015, that management company was McDonald Transit. They, in turn, set up what I will call a shell corporation, Transit Management of Charlotte, and through that entity, they hire the operators, mechanics, and frontline supervisors that provide our day-to-day operations. Why those employees are members of Transit Management of Charlotte and not directly brought on by the management company is to protect Charlotte and our riders in the case of a transition to a new holding company. We still have the basis for providing service, and a new company doesn't have to come in and start from scratch, hire 500 plus operators, several hundred mechanics to provide the service. I'm sorry, was there a question online? All right, if not, I'll move on. So as I mentioned earlier, this is not the situation we find ourselves, I think, is a direct result of the pandemic that we have been going through worldwide over the last couple of years that has resulted in an extremely tight labor market. If it was not enough that any of us could imagine going through a 2+ year pandemic, I think the follow-up and the ripple effect of the tightening of the labor market was also an effect that came out of the last couple of years. And this, quite frankly, is an issue nationwide. Here are several of our sister agencies of our size nationwide who have been going through the same problem of recruitment and retention of frontline employees. And so just wanted to give you a snapshot of that this is not a problem specific to Charlotte, but one that is plaguing our industry, not just transit, but also transportation across the board. So what I wanted to do is give you, just for illustrative purposes, a snapshot of one-day activities during this shortage of labor. In our FY23 budget, CATS has funded 571 operator positions. That's 571 bus operators to operate our day-to-day services. For the last several months, we've had over 70 open positions. Those are open positions that we've been unable to recruit for a variety of reasons. I will say in my 25+ years of public service, I've never had a challenge hiring bus operators. If one operator left an organization for whatever reason, we normally had 10 or 12 or 20 other operators on a list who were ready to take their place. So this is certainly a different phenomenon than I've ever seen in my career. But when you look at the math and what the result of that is, when you take the 571 funded positions, subtract the 74 at that time open positions, you start off the day at 497 available bodies to operate our bus service. Each weekday, our schedule calls for 292 bus operators to provide that weekday service. But during that week, since CATS is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year operation, we have to provide what I will call a normal weekend days off. People like myself who work on our administrative staff, we work generally Monday through Friday with Saturday and Sunday off. That is the typical situation for many of us in this room. But for a 24-hour-a-day operation, we have to spread that out during the week. So some of those 571 operators will be off Sunday, Monday, others Tuesday, Wednesday, others Thursday, Friday, etc. And so we've planned for that. So we spread that out so that each day, 89 people will be off on their regular weekend day off. So think of it in that manner. That would bring our number down to 408 available bodies to operate our service. And the same math holds true for Saturday service and Sunday service. You'll see the day off associated with that. And so when you start off with that 408, that is when you subtract 292 from 497, you then subtract 89 from that number. That leaves us with 116 available operators for our service. That 116 we describe as our extra board. Those are the operators above our service and known absenteeism, expected absenteeism, that we have set aside for unexpected activities. And so when you take that 116 number, subtract the 35 that will be on vacation, we require our operators and mechanics to choose their vacations at the beginning of the year so that we can plan for those absences during the year. That would take us down to 81. And so when you look at that perfect storm of open positions and unexcused absences, for whatever reason, that an individual that day, 107 individuals did not come to work for a variety of reasons. That put us, when you take the 81 and you subtract the 107, that puts us in a negative 26 position. So we were down 26 operators on this day over the last couple of months. And I think this just as a snapshot as to why we are providing that information to our customers each day of how many operators are off for a variety of reasons, have not shown up to work. Next slide. So we've looked back over each day over the last couple of months and looked at the actual amount of operators that were off for a variety of reasons. You will see through this chart, there are only 6 days during this month, during this time period, that we had more operators available than we needed for service. The vast majority of those days, we were in the negative. That negative number averages about 23 per day, but some of those days, the absenteeism put us in 40 to 50 unavailable operators. So that is the reason why we have the action item we will be considering later, that Jason will go through, is how do we begin to right-size our service with the expected average manpower that will be available on a day-to-day basis. Jason will go into more detail on that in a few minutes. Next slide. And so we find ourselves in this situation with an extended period of operational shortages. As I mentioned, with the increase in absenteeism, low retention rates, and each and every day we have to reallocate manpower from our higher frequency routes to low frequency routes. That is a very dynamic situation because during the day our manpower situation changes. And so because of this and other reasons, we are bringing that action item to you later this evening. Next slide. And so what do we have been working with our partner at RATP Dev over the last several months, preparing them for their negotiations with their union. The CATS FY23 budget was acted upon by the MTC in April. It was included in the city manager's budget in May and passed by the city council in June. And so really they weren't able to get into the really crux of their negotiations until our budget was passed and I could give them the parameters, the financial parameters that they had to work with in their upcoming negotiations. Couple that with changes to providing more flexible bus route scheduling and closing attendance policy loopholes. We believe we have a long-term strategy, labor-related strategy, that will address this current situation. Next slide. And so lastly, before I open up to bring Robert Smith to the podium, I also wanted to announce, many of you may have noticed through our social media channels that we have made additional changes to our real-time app working with our Transit Service Advisory Committee members, we heard from our bus riders that they wanted to have information on a daily basis to understand how many, what was the absenteeism and manpower situation day to day, but also if we could provide more information that would not just, when the app reverts back to the normal schedule, when a bus doesn't leave the depot because of a manpower shortage, that we could get to the point where we would actually provide information through our real-time app to our customers that a particular bus on a particular route will not be operating. That went live this Monday, and I believe we've gotten very positive feedback from our customers on that. And so providing real-time, as close to real-time information as we can to our customers so that they can make informed decisions about their mobility options. Second, coupled with our next strategy of we are in the midst right now of negotiating with the transit networking companies like Uber and Lyft to be able to supplement our mobility options with a subsidy from CATS, that on days where we're having problems with manpower and service isn't going out, that our riders would be able to utilize our app, call an Uber, Lyft, or perhaps some other company, get their mobility option, and CATS would subsidize a portion of that trip. We're continuing to work out the parameters, the financial parameters of that with all of those companies. I will say the reason why we are bringing that through our app rather than sending people to those companies' app is that we want to at least try as hard as we can to restrict this subsidy to only transit users. I don't want to pay for regular Uber, Lyft, or other riders, and so we want to funnel this activity through our app, and at the next board meeting in August, I will have more detailed information on the timeline of that rolling out. So with that, if there are any questions for me, I will be happy to address, and then I'll turn over to Mr. Smith. All right, hearing none, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Lewis, I wanted to go last, but did no one raise a question prior to the end of this presentation?
No one in the room, Madam Chair.
Okay, I did just have one question about the recruitment, retention, and referral program that you had been shared with us via email that was implemented in January. So that was for CATS employees, right? And then RAPT Dev authorized a similar kind of program in March. Is that correct?
So thank you for reminding me, Madam Chair. I did not remind that our bus operations is operated by RATP Dev, but all of our rail and special transportation services are actually city employees. And so with the passage of the city's FY23 budget, our rail and special transportation employees got their immediate raises in line with other city departments, but those employees also were able to participate in our recruitment retention program that was rolled out earlier this year, which provided upwards of $2,000 bonuses for retention bonuses and I believe $1,000, $500 or $1,000 for referral, for $500 bonuses for referrals. At that time, we authorized RATP Dev to provide similar retention bonuses. Theirs was a little different than how the city provided to its employees, but it was somewhere along the line with that.
Thank you. So if this has only been implemented as recently as March, it may be too soon to say, but do you have any data around the effectiveness of it? Is it seeming to have an impact in terms of metrics for recruiting, retaining, and obtaining referrals for employees?
Well, I think from a city standpoint, it certainly had an impact. I can bring exact numbers back to the board, but we did see a slackening of the loss of employees, and a good number of our employees did participate in the referral program. Obviously, the biggest impact from a job opening and open positions remains in our bus service, and that is the reason why we authorize RATP Dev to do that. I think you'll hear more about their success of their program when Mr. Smith comes to the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, I think there are no other questions in the room, so I will ask Robert Smith, Executive of RATP Dev, to come to the podium.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Robert Smith, and I'm the Vice President of Client Relations for RATP Dev USA. It's a pleasure to be here today, and we were actually looking forward to have the opportunity to talk to you about items that have been in the public for some time and to discuss it from a holistic standpoint from our perspective. Here with me also is David Barco. He's our communication specialist that helps us around the country in communications and the like, and I'll take a moment to introduce him as well.
Thank you, everybody, for having both of us, certainly. What we're going to do here, and I don't know if you can bring up the presentation that we sent along. No? Okay. We'll talk through it then.
Okay.
Sure. You want to grab your laptop there? So our objective here, as we get the slides together, what Mr. Smith and I are here to do today is to inform and educate, right? Because what we've seen, certainly over the past at least 3 to 4 weeks, are question marks certainly in the public, in the press, and I'm sure in this room, as to who is RATP Dev and what is RATP Dev's role here in Charlotte and Charlotte-Mecklenburg County. And that's really what we're focused on to do today. Hopefully we can bring it up, but we'll talk through some of these points here. That's perfect. So who are we, right? We are RATP Dev USA. We're a subsidiary of RATP Dev based out of France. But here in the United States, RATP Dev either manages or operates 33 bus and coach lines around the country, 22 paratransit, shuttle university. We even do sightseeing tours in national parks around the country, and streetcar lines around the country as well, operating in cities all across the United States from East Coast to West Coast.
With that, I would like to say again that our company, the RATP Dev Group, is actually based out of France and started in 1900. If you've been to Paris and ridden on the subways there, those are trains that we actually operate. Our group is called RATP. It's our parent group, and they spin off operations around the globe called RATP Dev USA and the like. Here in the U.S., I guess around 2009, our company became interested, like a lot of foreign countries, companies to do business in the U.S. They purchased a company called McDonald Transit based out of Fort Worth, Texas. McDonald Transit has been in business for over 50 years. The first contract that they had in Fort Worth, Texas, we still have until this day. So a good deal of what we do is the partnership with individuals that we work with. We made that purchase in 2009. However, McDonald Transit's first contract with the city of Charlotte was in 2003. So the company has been here. Our goal has always been to be a partner that gets things done and not be out in the public with it. So that's what we have right now that brings us up to today.
And today, right, we have long-term partnerships, not just here in Charlotte, as Robert said, since 2003, right, if I do the math correctly. But in Arizona, Suntran, City Bus, and in other areas around the country, starting back in 1972. So our history is long. With many of ours, it's not in and out 1 or 2 years or 3 years, but long relationships, and certainly here with CATS, as we say, since 2003. And in a global presence, as we said, French-based, French-founded, operate in the United Kingdom and elsewhere around the country. Right here, in terms of figures, right, we operate in 15 countries, 27,000 employees around the world, over 100 operations. We do about 1.5 billion passenger rides per year on our network. So that's a lot of people that we handle on a day-to-day basis. And we're in over 780 cities around the country through our partners and directly. And as Robert said, 1972 McDonald Transit was founded. In 2003, they signed the first agreement with Charlotte Cats. RATP Div USA acquired McDonald Transit in 2009. And our relationship here in Charlotte, we provide essentially 3 employees, full-time employees, general manager, an assistant general manager, and a director of maintenance. And I believe 2 of those gentlemen are sitting over here to our right at the table. So we have local presence here, and they're our employees. And throughout the last 18 years, from McDonald Transit to RATP Dev USA acquiring McDonald Transit, it has always been about a partnership, and a partnership focused on growth and certainly change in Charlotte. As Charlotte has grown, we have grown with the city. We have grown the transportation possibilities, certainly on bus lines.
One thing I would like to say is I've been with McDonald Transit now 5 years. And before that, like John and many in this room, I've worked on both the public side. So I've been in John's seat in other locations, and I'm now on the private side. So I've had both of those. So I understand the pain of your brand when there's media coverage and there's things that's going on that we have here in Charlotte. Charlotte, like a lot of the places we operate, is a fast-growing, dynamic region in an area that's continuing to have growth. And part of what we do is to try and distinguish ourselves and differentiate ourselves with our competitors is that partnership that goes long-term. There's 2 different types of contracts that we currently have in the U.S., and we talked about the different types of services. There is management contracts, which is what we have here in Charlotte. A management contract is one where the agency pretty much retains most of the risk, most of the responsibility, and most of everything that goes on. You set policy, you keep things such as safety and training, and a lot of things like that. Those contracts are generally ones that were more prevalent in the 80s and 90s. As time went on, a different type of contract started, and it's called operating contracts. It's where cities, and just here in North Carolina, Greensboro is a good example, Asheville is another example, where they literally transition the risk over, but that impacts the cost model that you do with it. So you own the risk of labor, you own the risk of maintenance failures, you own a lot of different things. So those are the 2 different types of contracts. Here we have the management contract, and we basically provide leadership with 3 positions that we have. And I think it's important that we distinguish the difference between the 2, because as John said, and he did a great job of explaining that, the partnership is much more intimate when it's a management contract than when it's an operating one, and the contract literally is written that way. Some of the things that we'd like to highlight over the last 18 years, even though it's a management contract, during this time, we believe because of our footprint around the globe, we know because of our footprint around the U.S. that as a company like us, we bring thought leadership. And most recently, we brought to the table at our expense a technology assessment. That's where we came in and did a comprehensive technology assessment, and that information then can be used by the agencies such as CATS to set the direction going forward. That's part of value add that we bring in as well. We also have, over these years, successfully negotiated contracts, both on the maintenance side and on the transportation side, with the bus operators without significant issues related to service. There were no work stoppages or slowdowns during that particular time. So very quietly, we have been in the background doing what we need to do. But one of the things that we're finding right now is that coming up to, let's just say pre-COVID, you didn't know we really existed. We just did things. There were things such as CATS was always recognized nationally within APTA for things such as growth, such as maintenance on their vehicles. I believe at one point you had one of the oldest average age fleets in the nation, but your mean distance between road failure was one of the best. You were still beating that. That was a partnership between you and our company as we did that. So those types of things, I believe it's important that we discuss as we go forward so that we understand what we're working with. The other thing too is that we've done a survey, and we found that in our network here in the U.S., we did a survey, I believe it was around 1,500 people, and we found that of the 1,500 operators that we hired, more than half of them left within the first year. 46% of the ones that left within the first year left in the first 3 months. That's very similar to what you will find here in Charlotte or cities that were in the peer group that Mr. Lewis, CEO, showed when it was up here. So it means that what you're doing in terms of the bonuses, what you're doing in terms of livable wage and the like, those will resonate, but it's no different than what we're finding in our network, whether it's Fort Worth, whether it's Tucson, and I'm trying to find places that's similar. We also operate the DC circulator in Washington, DC. We're having that problem whether it's in a large metropolitan area or whether we're in Central or West Texas, it's the same thing. People are choosing to do something other than drive a bus. And what we're doing is putting our focus nationally and internationally on employee engagement. Our chief people officer did a really good presentation for us recently, speaking about how the population that we're hiring now, the ones that's leaving in the first 3 months, we've got to do something different in how we engage them. We've got to do something different in how we retain them and how we train them actually going forward. So that's the type of thing that I won't get into very much, but that's really where we are. But we want to thank you for allowing us to come out today. We are here to take questions. And John, if there's anything else that you or the board would like for us to discuss, let me know.
I'd like to ask you to give us a little bit more detail. You say you have the operating contract. So when you have operating contract and it's a management agreement around how to provide the service, what is the accountability for projecting, when we started the losses, projecting how to get new people in, and what are the specifics that you've addressed to accomplish that?
You're talking about the recruitment of operators?
I'm talking about recruitment of operators. What are some of the things, I mean, I've heard the retention and the bonus and those kinds of things, but if you are operating, and you are in some ways operating a healthcare facility, and you knew that you were going to have a problem with nurses, in my experience, traveling nurses come in. You have to pay them more, you have to do that. So I'm looking at what are those strategies that are similar or necessary in your organization and in your business to accomplish those kinds of things.
There's several things. Let's take here in Charlotte. We put together something in, I believe, late April, early May. It's our 100-day plan to hire 100 operators in 100 days. And we're changing how we're going about our recruitment. We've increased the number of job fairs. We've increased the number of referrals. We're working with the bonuses, and we've asked for and was allowed to call it something different so that we could get folks through the door. And we feel really comfortable that we will make that 100 operators within 100 days to help make up for that. So our focus has changed, is one, community engagement has changed, and we're also looking to reduce the number of people that are leaving our employment. We have people that are attriting, not only here in Charlotte, but across the country at a much higher rate. So we're looking at how we engage them and how we convince them to stay. So those two are a combination of things that we're doing that some work and some don't. And all of this is actually post-COVID that we're finding that particular issue with.
Let me be a little bit more specific. When you have the network of people across the country that you've described with all of the other cities, are there any cities that you work with to ask them to send people to Charlotte in the shortages that we have, and how do you address that?
We can say that we do that when we start up new businesses, and it's very short term, and it's for very specific things. But what we're finding is that because we have a labor union, that's one, is a deterrent. And then two, we're finding that the cities around the country, the ones that we mentioned, they're having the same problems. Let's use Fort Worth. Fort Worth is literally short, and they've done things such as reduce their their headways, increase their headways and reduce service to accommodate that. As we look at places in the Washington, D.C. area, it's the same thing. And there's a couple of things that, well, let me just first answer your question very specifically. We don't have the ability to bring people from other networks right now, primarily because of the labor relationships that we have and how you would bring them in and how you would make that happen. But it is something that that's being experienced throughout our industry in the U.S. and not only just our company.
Okay. Then I think the next question that I have is, you talk about headways and what we're doing, and this service has been in the newspaper for a while. I would expect that you knew that these things were going on before the media paid attention to it. So I'm asking, we're going to be talking about how do we right-size the service. What is your recommendation that we would do, knowing that we have a labor shortage and your experience in this industry, that what are the steps that are essential for us to be able to provide reliable service to our residents and citizens?
So a couple of things. I believe, first and foremost, what the city of Charlotte, Mecklenburg is doing relative to livable wage, because the competition for labor is very fierce, and some people we're losing people to big box stores and the like. That's one. The other two is yes, this has been coming for some time since COVID. People were retiring at a much higher clip post-COVID than they were pre-COVID. And that's a phenomena that not only hit our transit industry, but hit labor in general. That's one. So I believe that some of the financial things that the agency is doing, I believe is good. On our end, we've got to do things. When we talked about the 43% of the people leaving within the first 3 months, what is it that they're leaving about? Is it their schedule? We're hiring folks, and yes, we're paying you good money, but you're probably going to work weekends for the next 2 or 3 years. That's one of the main things that we're seeing that people are leaving for. We have to look at how we schedule work, and that's going to take a time for us to get there. And I'm getting in an area that's not mine right now, but I think we have to look at things such as work schedule. We also have to look at work environment that we have them in, and so on. And we're finding that not only in Charlotte, but throughout our industry. I talk to people in other agencies that have nothing to do with our company, and we're all struggling and pulling and tugging to try and find the right combination to make that work. And we're going to continue to do that here. I think the success of getting people in the door and having them to stay is something that we've got to stay at. We have to recognize that it's going to cost us more to recruit than it has in the past, and we've got to also look at what does it take to retain.
Aside from the people, though, but what are the technology changes that we should be making, and what are the system changes that we should be making to be more reliable?
There are, I don't really want to get over into John's area, but there are a few things from a technology standpoint that allows push technology to allow people to know when the vehicle is coming. For instance, there is cost notwithstanding. When I've lived in larger cities, Chicago is one. Headway management is a term. I knew when the vehicle was coming because I could see it on an app, and I would go down to the bottom floor of my condo, and I could walk out and I could be there. That helped improve from that perspective, but that doesn't work everywhere. So I think there's a variety of technologies that have to be looked at based upon your capital programs and things of that sort. And that's something that we're more than willing to bring our technology partner in to have that conversation more with. The ones that did the recent technology assessment, they looked at a variety of things, and we're more than willing to bring them back to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I got a couple questions.
Okay.
And these are just nuts and bolts. Number one, you said you started in April with hiring 100 drivers in 100 days. If you started April 1st, we're at 117 days right now. How many drivers have you hired?
Actually, it kicked off in more around May. I think we're at May 16th. We started May 16th, and we're at 67, I believe.
Okay. And then the last thing is expectations for your hires. When you're in a service industry, when you're in safety, when you're in healthcare, you sign on to work shifts that are not Monday to Friday, like most of us in this room have Monday to Friday jobs. I'm a realtor. I should work on the weekends. I don't. But most of us have a Monday to Friday job. In a service industry job, in this particular field here, there's the potential. So are you going after the right candidates when you're hiring with those expectations up front, knowing that, you know, it's a given that you're going to work weekends?
And that's always a challenge, I think, in any industry right now, especially when you're hiring younger folks who want a job, want a career, want to start. Then the reality sets in after a month or two of what their lifestyle is, whether it's any career, like you say, in the service industry or otherwise. So I think that is the challenge of convincing younger folks to not only take that job, but this is the lifestyle and here are the benefits, right? And adjusting to it, or as Robert said, being flexible with schedules as time goes on. Yes, like you say, for the first 2 or 3 months, you're going to be working Saturdays and Sundays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., whatever the schedule allows. Is there an adjustment to be made after those 2 months? You kind of earn your way out of those roles and find new people. But that's certainly adjustment. And in any industry, that is one of the challenges right now of, hey, everybody wants to work, to make a lot more money, but while working less or working on their own time. And we certainly see that across the country in what we do and in any industry that is involved in service or otherwise.
I've got a question. Perhaps one of the things that's a detriment to hiring more drivers or operators is some pretty high-profile criminal activity that's happened with our drivers. Have you done anything to address safety concerns?
We have, in partnership with CATS, the rollout of the training, de-escalation training. There are things that we're coordinating with CATS with, as well as the camera systems on the vehicles, talking to our operators. There have been some really high-profile things that's happened here, and I don't know, you probably know the detail as well as I do. Those things in our business from time to time happen, and what we have to do is to try and work with law enforcement, to try and work with what we do in the street to mitigate that as much as possible. And I'd say within our network, Charlotte actually does, notwithstanding the high-profile ones, I would put your stats up there with other places. And sometimes we get caught in the bubble of looking internal, and we shouldn't dismiss any of them. But I wouldn't say that it's worse than a city of similar size in our network that I would see going forward.
I just want to say thank you all for coming this evening. A couple of the things that you listed out were livable wage, work environment, in addition to the work scheduling. Can you talk a little bit more about work environment and what are your hires looking for? What are your employees looking for to make that working environment better?
The stat that I referenced, where we interviewed the 1,500 people, they're telling us that I'm young, I have a family, and if I can go down the street to a big box and make the same starting wage, I may take that choice. The other thing that they may look at is sometimes you're driving at night in neighborhoods you may or may not feel comfortable in. That's the nature of the business, and it has been for decades in what we do. That's a bigger issue, I believe, than recruitment. The other thing that we need to do is we're finding that where we improve employee engagement, where we have programs to where we show that we appreciate them and things like that. We've got to do more of that, and that's what our people officers are telling us. Our industry for decades has been very regimented. You come to work, and if you miss X number of days, you get days off and so on. It's very regimented. And the new people that we're hiring, this is not an excuse, but it's a reality, they are a different group. The older people are retiring quicker, and the younger people, actually, the higher starting wage isn't the draw that it once was. And that's my opinion from being in the industry for 40 years. It's not there. And I believe that what you're doing here in Charlotte, I've bragged about in different places for other reasons, but there are in terms of the steps that you're taking. But it is one that we have not given up on. It was just this past week that we had our chief people officer giving a presentation. That's where those stats came from. And we're rolling out something nationally, particularly on our operating contracts, where we're spending the money to do the engagement because it's cheaper than what it takes to hire and train someone new.
And just to add to that point, in terms of work environment, it's also the continued partnership and engagement with Mr. Lewis and his team and everyone else at CATS to determine, right, how we improve the work environment, wages, hiring, employee engagement, and community engagement. We have to keep doing it together. It's not just on our ATP Dev and the team to figure it out, nor is it on the CATS team to figure that out. And those are conversations happening day to day, week to week. And how do we do that? Sometimes things take longer to roll out, than we want to, but they're ongoing conversations of a partnership. And when we have a management partnership like this, that is our key role, to continue to be proactive, and we do it around the country, not just here. Be proactive, make suggestions and recommendations, not just because they come out of thin air, but certainly from our experience in Greensboro, in Austin, Texas, in Washington, D.C., in Tucson, Arizona. What have we learned there, whether we have an operating contract or a management contract in any of those cities? What have we learned there, and what can we bring to Charlotte and execute together?
So where do you see us in this labor cycle? Obviously, it's like any economic cycle. Where do you see us? I mean, we've been in it for quite a while, and with that, how many employees are you really down right now? I know you're hiring, but where do we stand right now?
John's numbers that he presented earlier are the numbers, and in the labor cycle. And what appears to be slowing down now is the attrition. Where people are saying, "I'm done, I'm going home." The great retirement that you also read about in the paper, that seems to be slowing somewhat. And we'll have to do better about adding those to our report that we give, to CATS. The other one is in terms of the labor cycle. I think we're going through something right now. I used the term we're being disrupted in a lot of ways. The labor market is the one that I believe caught a lot of us by surprise. We understood and saw Uber coming. We understood and saw other types of things that would disrupt our industry. But after COVID, I don't believe that some of us saw that coming as fast and as hard as it's coming at us, and it's impacting our industry, not just here in Charlotte. I know I'm overstating that, but I think it's important for us to know that that's a bigger issue. You mentioned security and safety. That's a bigger issue as well that we're working with, and it shows up on our vehicles. Some of the town hall meetings that we may have with our operators, what they talk about in the town hall meetings is some of the things that we're discussing here right now. I come to work every day, I do what I do, but I'm not sure, and so we're continuing to figure out ways to work our way through that and keep them employed.
And I think on a broader sense, no one knows in any industry where the labor cycle is right now. All you have to do is, you can turn on the news, read the paper, head on social media. So I don't think anybody really knows. I think, the efforts of the 100 operators in 100 days, right, the proactive planning that our ATP Dev USA has put in place, certainly in partnership with the team at CATS, is our best way, without money falling from the sky to pay everybody double, right, is our best path forward to push our way through this labor shortage, certainly here in Charlotte, and that's the same thing we're doing in other cities around the country, and certainly every industry is trying to do. How do we be creative, and how do we make it happen without overpaying everybody?
Yeah, just glad you have a plan. That's
absolutely
that's
always
something
always
we
a
weren't
plan.
clear on, but that's great.
So can we go back to retention of the employees that we have, right? And how much professional development are you investing in the employees? Because I do feel as if, that's kind of part of the retention, right? Where employees feel valued, they feel like they're being given the tools necessary to be successful in their jobs. And I hope I'm not out of scope, but that's always a concern for me when I look at employees, making sure that they're being given the tools necessary to be effective.
Yes, this employee engagement process, that may be the wrong word to use, that our company is looking at, but how do we value them? How do we let them know what they're doing is important? How do we listen? All those soft skill things that we've got to do, because we're finding in some of our places, money wasn't the answer. So we have to continue to do that, and I think a big part of it, some of the things that we're doing, I think Mr. Lewis and his staff will come out sometimes. We have town hall meetings. Employees like to be heard. They like to be able to speak their grievances and know that there's someone that's going to listen and make it happen. It sounds cliche-ish, but some of the things that we're doing are real soft skill types of things on the engagement side. It may keep a person another year, while we go through the process of retention. Some of the things I can only guess that'll be in the presentation later. We'll talk about some of the structural matters that perhaps we could look at as well.
So in
Mayor
regards,
Bales?
I'm sorry, in regards to professional development, is there ongoing training for our bus drivers to make sure that,
Yeah.
because we are in a service industry here, so catering to our customer and making sure that they have the tools and the ability to engage with their customer in a professional manner.
Why don't you let me answer that, because I think the issues that you brought out, Mayor Bales, we are certainly hearing that on the rail and STS side. And we have been investing in professional development for them. And so you look at the progression of, I came and started as an operator, then I'd like to move into scheduling, and then maybe I want to move into, supervision, and then I'd like to move into scheduling, and then maybe into another entity. We have that flexibility on our side of the line. I think on theirs, they only have two roles. You're either a mechanic or an operator. And so I think it's different from their perspective. They're trying to engage them in the position they're in. But once someone takes another position, they're out of their organization. So you're exactly right, and we're seeing the benefit of that on our side because they stay within the city. They're taking higher, more technical, more advanced positions due to that investment, makes a happier city employee. But I don't know that as a structure, there are many ways to advance under that.
Well, and I'm not necessarily talking about advancement as much as I am talking about giving them the tools necessary to interact with their customer in a way that it's a positive reflection on CATS, but also a positive reflection on the system as a whole and the drivers themselves.
Sure. Or you want to talk about the de-escalation training?
The de-escalation training is there. I know in the last year, post-COVID, that there's a new position inside of CATS where they're developing training programs, and a lot of those are customer service related type training programs where de-escalation takes stress away. Customer service training for our frontline supervisors in dealing with the operators. So the answer is yes. Those are there. Those are some of the things that we've had to really push forward post-COVID to slow down the retention. There was a lot of stress during COVID. I spent a lot of time in Charlotte during COVID, and the things that the city did to help address that, we talked about at our Paris office. You did a really, really good job in how we managed through that entire process. And coming out of that, however, the stress levels were still high, and our retirement rates started to creep up to the rest of our peer group and different things like that. So we're having more and more to do the de-escalation training, to do the customer service training, and do the things we're talking about, which is, do we treat our people the right way that they At least we take away that reason that they would want to go home.
And lastly, Mayor Bales, I think specifically to the de-escalation and customer service training, when a lot of these issues were coming to a head, we were partnering with other departments in the city and finding best practices nationwide. And so a lot of the training that we gave and provided for those employees was based on some of the community service training that our police department is doing, tailored to transit. A little different than law enforcement, but that development came out of some of the positive advancements that CMPD were able to achieve.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, I see that there was a question in the chat from David Scholl. What percentage of USA employees are union?
I'm sorry?
I think it's what percentage of your employees are union versus non-union?
I'm going to guess that we're probably in the 65% range. And many of the non-union are places in West Texas, Central Florida, but 65% plus.
All right, go ahead.
And the solutions are the same. Employee relations trumps labor relations all day, so whether they're in a union or not, the same solutions work.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before I follow up with a few? Okay. And let me just say, for all the speakers in the room, probably great to say your name when you and what town you're representing, so everybody who's listening in will know that. So I'm a little confused about the incentives and their effectiveness that RAPT Dev has been implementing. I heard you say higher wage isn't the draw, money wasn't the answer. So what, can you give me more specific details about the retention bonuses that have been implemented since March? Is there any data to show they're being effective for your program, just for RAPT Dev?
As John said earlier, we will get very specific information and send that to you. There is a lag effect to that, but we did implement that bonus. I believe it was later in the year. It wasn't March. It was a little bit later. But let us, without bumbling about with that, let me get specific data from our general manager, and we'll get that to everyone so we can know what that is.
Okay. And then I just want to have a little more clarity, Mr. Lewis. It seems like we're hearing a lot about hiring shortages for our buses, which is under the aegis of RAPT Dev. Are you seeing shortages for light rail, which is under the aegis of the city, if I'm understanding correctly?
So we're not, if you remember back to my presentation, that the situation that we find on the bus side is that perfect storm of open positions, unfilled positions, and daily absences. What we are seeing similar on our rail and special transportation is a little more difficulty, and it's taken us longer to recruit, but we have a different attendance policy on the city side, so we're not seeing the levels of daily absenteeism on the rail and STS that they are seeing on the bus side. And so I would not say that we're a lot better. I would say the issues are different.
Okay, because simply I would want to know if you were seeing different outcomes to know what was the difference in your policies. And it sounds like the attendance policy is the only major difference that you've identified to explain a different labor and operational experience. Is that correct?
That's correct. And our numbers are significantly lower. I believe we need about, I'm looking at 75 rail operators. 79 versus 571. So, I mean, there's a little difference in scope and breadth in that.
And then last question, you mentioned that the real-time app has improved. And I don't know if you can easily put up on the screen an example of what it's going to look like now when a route has to get canceled because an operator is not available. If you can put that up, please do.
Madam
Because
Chair,
I think,
we'll
Are
try
you gonna
and
do
do
that
that
next?
at some point before the meeting is over, but it wasn't in the slide deck, but I'll see if staff can provide that.
okay, great, because I do think that's very helpful to see important improvement on that. So if we have no longer any other questions in the room, I will thank Mr. Lewis and Mr.
Are there-
Smith.
I have a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, CATS has spent a lot of time with the 15-minute program, which means more operators, more buses. What are they doing in relationship to trying to fill those voids, or is that going to be put to bed for a while because you don't have enough drivers now? So what happens with the planning that has gone into every 15 minutes rather than every 45 minutes or 30 minutes?
Sure. Great question, Mayor Edwards. I'm going to answer that in two parts. I think right now, we have an acute labor issue, particularly on our bus side, that is forcing us to recommend reducing our headways or increasing our headways, getting our service levels in line with available manpower. If all of the labor issues went away tomorrow, we still have many routes with 45 and 60-minute headways. That was outlined in the Envision My Ride program. Structure, frequency, and reliability. We're dealing with a reliability issue right now as a result of labor, but the frequency issue still resides and is one that we can only deal with through increased investment.
Is part of the issue? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't get on stage very much. The question comes down to is it easier to fill a train operator's position, which is non-union, or is the problem that we're having with employees for the buses because it is union, and that's creating some issues?
I will answer the rail side of it, and I will let Mr. Smith answer the union versus non-union if he has any perspective on that. I will say it's probably a little easier to hire a rail operator because they're not interacting with the public. That rail operator is behind closed doors and really has zero interaction with the public unless there's an incident or that requires that. So there's little to no day-to-day interaction with the public. But the training requirements of a rail operator is significantly higher. So when we hire a rail operator, they are in training 12 weeks? Yes. 12 weeks versus 4 to 6 in bus? 7 in bus. And Robert, if you have any perspective on the...
You said that perfectly. In fact, in a lot of agencies, the family of jobs, I believe that the mayor was talking about, is you would go from being a bus operator to a rail operator because it was seen as being a better job, not having to interact with the public and you moving in and out of stations versus going down streets. So that's exactly what we're seeing.
Mayor Higdon, did you have a question?
I just have a comment. I think as Mr. Thomas said at the beginning of this meeting, CATS, Mr. Lewis in particular, and CATS staff and even members of the MTC have been asked a lot in the media about what specifically we're going to do as far as in the labor contract to address these issues. And obviously we can't talk about that because it's still in negotiations. And I just want to make sure that that's loudly said, that we can't speak about it. It's not a lack of transparency. It's because the negotiations are still ongoing, and we all need to remember that.
Your point is well taken. Yes, sir.
And Madam Chair, I've got a statement I'd like to make, prepared statement.
By all means. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lewis, I'd like to address the current situation with our shortfall in our bus ridership and the potential scheduling changes. We've all heard about the decrease in ridership locally and nationally. This is not just a local problem, but it is our problem. This is not a permanent problem, but it is our problem. The solutions to this problem may not be permanent. And what we choose to do will potentially affect those that rely on bus services the most. People need buses to get to and from work, to school, to medical appointments, and to consumer services. A minimal decrease in services will be more than an inconvenience to many. But again, this is a temporary fix to hopefully resolve what the current issues are in the system. The one thing that we have the ability to do is to make sure that those that now may choose to utilize rail until the bus situation is resolved do not experience the same delays. Our rail and STS drivers are city employees, and we can and should make sure that there are no delays in these services. We have the ability to hire the drivers necessary to fulfill our obligations to the riders. Lastly, I have full confidence in John Lewis at the helm of CATS. There's no one more qualified to lead us out of this current situation that we're in and continue to expand the footprint of public transit in our area. I will continue to push John on the Red Line, on enhanced bus services and amenities, and on the BRT, but I will stand beside you, sir, and support your leadership, because without you, we start over.
Thank you, Mayor Knox. Do we have any questions from those attending virtually? You can just come off mute if so. Okay, I don't think I'm hearing anybody. So at this time, I will thank Mr. Lewis and Mr. Smith for their presentations. And we will now have the report from Transit Service Advisory Committee Chair, Chrissy Exlin.
Thank you, Commissioner Altman. Microphone. Thank you, Commissioner Altman and members of the MTC. I think sometimes working in the public sector is a thankless job, and I know everyone at CATS is a human being who goes to work every day and does the best they can, so I just wanted to acknowledge that in all the scrutiny that's on CATS right now, and thank you for your work. I also wanted to point out, as Mr. Lewis said, that that real-time app has been updated since our last TSAC meeting, where that was one of the things that we wanted to see, was to see if a bus has been canceled, so people aren't waiting for something that doesn't show up. I have used it myself this week. It's great to see when a bus trip has been canceled, so thank you very much for fixing that. And we hope that that brings predictability to riders. At our July TSAC meeting, we voted to resume holding in-person meetings again since early 2020. We also voted to endorse the methodology that CATS is bringing before us here tonight to strategically cut certain bus and rail service to better fit the existing labor pool. While no one who rides transit is happy about service reductions, the fact is that we already have service reductions. They're just unpredictable and random, while the proposed reductions are orderly and planned. Overall, having that reliability is important, even if it does sometimes mean a longer wait for the next bus or train. There were numerous comments at our TSAC meeting by various members that I wanted to mention that are things that we continue to want to watch going forward. First of all, of course, everyone's wondering, how long will the service changes last? Certainly nobody can predict when every bus driver we need will be hired, but there's a concern that some of the service changes could become permanent without ample oversight and progress reporting. We'd like to hear incremental updates on when any service is restored due to more bus operators being available. This also includes better communicating with the public on the service changes being made. One idea would be to post the complete list of changes, like literally the slides from Jason's presentation tonight. Put those on the CATS website and then post updates to that list, like literally write it in when things get restored. That would bring a lot of transparency to operations. Another concern was how to make sure transit riders know about the service changes beyond the app and the website. Most of the people I see at CDC are not on Twitter, they're not on the website, they're not using the app. So we need signage at CTC and other locations on the bus routes themselves, like on the buses that run those routes, at the stops on those routes, and working with the media to get the word out. I think there's also been some discussion about, the tweeting the number of driver absences on a given day was a good start, but I think maybe if we could take that to the next level of like, how does that actually impact a given rider? What is the chance that my bus isn't going to run today? So maybe we can work on that. And then I think the final sort of thought was, how how can we use this to figure out, like, people that left CATS during the pandemic for various reasons, ridership is at an all-time low. How do we get those people back? And so one idea on that would be to, in the service of increased transparency, going with radical transparency, maybe make the rider complaint database public. I'm thinking about like the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have a database of complaints against banks. Surely CATS has a database for when people call or email, and those things must get logged and dispositioned of what happens to them. I've heard from a lot of people, they don't tell CATS when they have a problem because CATS never gets back to them or nothing gets fixed. So maybe providing reporting on that, making the database public, reporting here in MTC or TSAC meetings would show, is the list of canceled bus trips accurate? Are people still missing buses that they think are coming? Other complaints that people don't think get fixed or followed up on? This might give some insight into why people aren't using transit and to bring them back. That concludes my remarks. Thank you for your time.
May I ask a question? I think that you've really hit some key notes around this, that, we need to have the service changes informed in many multiple ways and methodologies. But I think one of the other things that I really liked is that when we talk about how do we do signage and making sure that that's one that we can get through planning that changes automatically, because we have restrictions that we've put around ourselves that we don't even think about. But I think people do now know that, you can get signage that changes and all of that. I struggle a little bit about the complaint database, because I think that if you look at our riders, and I'm guessing somewhere the riders now are essential riders, and access to databases and things like that. So could you guys think a little bit more about what might be most important for those essential riders to be able to provide feedback in a way that we could get back to them, that they don't have the electronics? I mean, is it something that's online? Most people have a cell phone these days, and remarks or something like that. I would like to have that some thought. I think a database, we have one of those, actually, and they do log these complaints. It's a citywide complaint system. And it is very, very onerous because there's so many complaints. But I think that what I'm really looking for, I think your goal is to look for how do you fix things? And so how do we learn focus groups, maybe, things like that? Some ideas. We'd love to, I think I'd like to hear your ideas about how to do that besides a database that you'd have to go and scroll through, and unless there's a database that's really great out there that does this stuff, which we haven't found.
Mayor Higdon?
Yeah, just a comment to add on to Mayor Lyle's comment. Maybe we need to step down from technology and provide, small pencils and some paper on the buses for people to write comments on a Dropbox, and for those that don't have phones and iPads and things like that.
You mean actually go back old school way?
I think most people still know how to write, so we can try that.
Thank you, Mayor Higdon. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Exlin? Anybody on virtually want to weigh in here? All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Exlin. I appreciate your work and the work of your committee very much. Next, report from the chair of CTAG, Adam Pasiak. There was no July meeting of CTAG. However, are there any questions for him? In the room or online? Okay, I don't think I see or hear anybody. So at this time, Mr. Ford, do we have anyone signed up to provide comments to the MTC from the public?
There's no one signed up for public comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. And now on to our first informational item, advancing the 2030 Transit System Plan. Mr. Lawrence.
Madam Chair, while Jason is heading to the podium, I'd like to just remind MTC members, as we were moving to advance the 2030 plan, one of the things that was topmost on our agenda back in 2018 and 2019 was bringing as many projects in our 2030 plan to a point where they can compete for federal funding. We were hopeful that the next administration would prioritize infrastructure and particularly transit. I think we got very lucky in that aspect that public transit has received the highest level of federal funding in a generation. That being said, our competitive edge in terms of projects ready to move forward and compete for federal funding slides each day. That's why we invested the sales tax money, $50 million, to begin the Silver Line study. We have had the Red Line study that has been sitting on the shelf for a number of years, much to Mayor Knox's dismay. I think our goal, once again, and I want to remind, is get as many projects as we can ready for federal funding so that once we answer the local funding question, we can go right into competition for federal money to bring these projects to fruition. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, and good evening, Madam Chair and members of the MTC. It's good to be back in front of you again in person. It's been a long 2 years. I'm Jason Lawrence. I'm the Director of Planning for CATS. And, is this working? All right, Paul, so I think you'll have to be my DJ. Next slide, thank you. So I want to give you a brief overview of the 2030 Transit System Plan, how it fits into the broader perspective of Connect Beyond, and go into a little bit of detail about this generational opportunity for federal funding for transit projects. We are at a high mark in that funding, and we want to talk to you tonight about how we get ready to meet that challenge, and we'll go into some next steps. Next slide. So the 2030 Transit System Plan, it's been our guiding map and document and policy document for well over 20 years, and we have advanced various corridors over that time. We've been very successful in our region for attracting federal funding for our projects, and we've seen a lot of great success. The Lynx Blue Line, the originally northeast and south corridors opening in 07 and 18. And during the 2019 system update, we added a proposed extension of that line to the town of Pineville and the community of Ballantyne. And we're advancing the rest of the plan. The Lynx Silver Line, been in front of this board many times talking about that. We now have a corridor that stretches across 3 counties, 29 miles going into Union County and Gaston County as well. It's currently in design, and we're having conversations with our regional partners about funding that design. And then the CityLinks Gold Line streetcar opened in 2 phases. 4 miles of that of the 10-mile project is open, and we just recently are moving towards advancing and updating that 30% design for the CityLinks Gold Line, the remaining 6 miles. And then, back in 2019, we came to you as part of that system update to have a conversation about the North Corridor and the West Corridor. And through that effort, this board adopted a strategy for a multi-phased approach for the North Corridor to have a more near-term improved and enhanced bus services on I-77 using the express lane, but also keeping an eye on the future for a long-term implementation of that Lynx Red Line commuter rail. Next slide. And that plan, the 2030 plan, is not only important for Mecklenburg County, but it is foundational for the recently adopted and endorsed Connect Beyond effort. Building out the Mecklenburg County plan in the 2030 Transit System Plan will enable us to build out into counties across the region if the partnerships are there and the funding is available. We put this in front of you all in October, and thinking about regional rail coming into Charlotte Gateway Station along with the Lynx Red Line, the 2030 plan really builds upon, the Connect Beyond builds upon the 2030 Transit System Plan. Next slide. Now, I spoke a bit about the timeline of us implementing these projects. While we were implementing Blue Line and doing studies for Southeast and West corridors, we were also working very diligently on the Lynx Red Line corridor since 1998 by doing major investment studies in 2002, environmental studies in the early part of the 2000s. We got to 30% design by 2009, and that's where the project stands today, is at 30% design. But over that 2009 time period to around 2012, the Norfolk Southern policy really changed the conversation on passenger rail along that Norfolk Southern O-line corridor, which runs through the towns of Huntersville, Davidson, Cornelius, and into Mooresville. And after that, we went through a series of strategic conversations about how to advance the corridor with that limitation. And then we brought that back to you all in a conversation around 2019 about, is this corridor still a priority? Do we still want to advance this as a priority in the 2030 Transit System Plan? And that was a resounding yes from the public, that the corridor was still seen as a valuable asset to work towards to deliver a commuter rail project. But also we need to do near-term mobility enhancements, and that's a part of that North Corridor strategy. Next slide. And just to zoom out a bit, I mean, we talk a lot about, delivering the project, and providing that service levels, but when we think about the vision of what this corridor was intended to do, I mean, it's the only line that directly serves the hearts of Davidson, Cornelius, Huntersville, and Charlotte. It goes through each of those downtowns. And then over that time period, transit-oriented development has popped up in areas like Davidson College and Antiquity, Oakhurst, Vermilion, the Brighton Town Center. All these have built along what is proposed to be that commuter rail corridor. It also helps us in the context of regional expansion, looking into Iredell County. And what we heard loud and clear during the system update was that there's a desire for more frequent service and more weekday and night service. And so any future update will need to include that in order to see if that is able to be incorporated with the future design. The Stavis Stations, so much has changed over the past 20 years. So the stations will not only function as park and ride in stations, but also integrated mobility hubs with bus services and first last mile connections. And just to go back about the different connections, bringing it to Charlotte Gateway Station, this corridor serves like a major entertainment district with the Carolina Panther Stadium, the baseball field, the soccer team now. So there's just so much happening at the Charlotte Gateway Station. So it's a very exciting project from a destination standpoint. Next slide. And that generational opportunity I spoke of earlier, we truly are at a high mark of that investment coming to transit over the coming years. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was recently adopted by Congress will set the stage for not only potentially for Red Line and Gold Line, but also Silver Line and other transit projects. But the important part to note is that projects that are ready across the nation are the ones that have the best ability to compete for that funding. Next slide. Because it'll be so important to have projects, updated design, environmental studies, so they can enter into project development. That's the process that we're taking with the Link Silver Line, and many cities and jurisdictions and agencies across the country are also following this approach. And so that's why we're advancing, proposing to advance the Gold Line, update that design, and that's what we're here to talk to you tonight about the Link's Red Line. Next slide. But as I'd stated earlier, the changing mobility landscape that we see in front of us, there's been new vehicle technologies that really have improved, the diesel locomotive that people think about when they think about commuter rail. A lot of enhancements have been created. You look to the Bright Line in Florida and other projects across the country. The rail technology has advanced much over the past 20 years. And we really think this, if we are able to update the design, this is part of that conversation. Next slide. And in that updated design, a lot has changed over the past 20 years. There's been a lot of development along the corridor. There's potentially looking at the grade crossings, updating that track design, looking at those station locations and ensuring that they're in the right place, looking at the drainage. So much has changed. It's really time to look at this more holistically. And then also evaluating that potential new alignment into Uptown to ensure that we have great access to the Charlotte Gateway Station. Next slide. So for you tonight, what we're putting in front of you is a potential request to bring requested action to update the Link's Red Line 30% design. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I do have a couple of questions. First and foremost, thank you for this presentation. I appreciate that you highlighted the fact that updating if we were to move forward with an update, that we would be looking at what I would like to think, getting away from a diesel engine going through our towns. But the other question that I have would be frequency of use, because as you stated, back 20 years ago, that kind of the concept of the Red Line was that You'd get on the train in the morning and go to Charlotte, and then you'd get on the train in the evening and come back home. I believe our communities have changed over the last 20 years. And my question is, if we were to do this update, do you foresee also updating the frequency in which we would be able to travel throughout the day between our communities?
So if you think about the corridor today, it's single track for the most part. So it's, that's why the original design was, go in one direction, turn around, come back in the afternoon. So updating the design, we could look at additional, at what's called sidings. That's where the trains can get out of the way to enable a train to go in both directions. And then in some instances, look where there's opportunities for double tracking to accommodate that additional frequency. So the frequency is really a function of the amount of track that you have available to you. And so part of that design, we would, early on could look at that, because those are big decisions to make, and we would need to look at that early in any update design.
Well, I know that my residents have said to me, and I'm not going to speak for the other mayors in the north, but the ability to not only go to Charlotte, but to go to Davidson or go to Cornelius or go to University throughout the day seems to have, the idea of using this level of service has morphed over the last 20 years. And that's something that if we are going to move forward, that's something that I would like to see as part of.
Thank you.
And I think, Jason, the frequency of use address, we're not talking about light rail that runs on a 9-minute or 12-minute cycle. I think best case scenario for us in the north end is that we have a service that runs twice an hour during peak times and once an hour thereafter. I think that's a doable scenario, and you could get the weigh-in and support from the residents at the north end for some kind of project that would have that metric where, yeah, in theory, I could take the train to Charlotte, I could go shopping, I could do whatever I gotta do, maybe I gotta go to the doctor, and I can come back later. It's not I'm getting on the train in Wilton, Connecticut, and I'm going to the Manhattan, and then coming back at 6 p.m. That's not, to what Mayor Bales said, the dynamics have changed. The need for that commuter rail has dissipated because so many people have changed the format of how they work now. I've got friends that are executives with Bank of America that will never leave Davidson again. They can work from their homes. So they don't need that. So the needs and the dynamics of the populace have changed. And I appreciate this. I've pushed this conversation, and I will always push this conversation. I don't think there's anybody I can cross paths with in Davidson that doesn't know how passionate I am about being able to get on something in this corridor and go back and forth to Charlotte. Even though my job is in Davidson and my job at Town Hall was in Davidson, I still like to come to Charlotte. But I don't want to get in the toll lanes and drive every time I come, and I would like to have that ability to utilize a service that would take my vehicle off the road. I think a couple of the changes that we have to consider, and I do appreciate this being on the agenda tonight. This was one of the things I did push for. But I think collectively, our boards have changed since the last time we had this discussed, and over half their boards are new. And to get the weigh-in from the rest of the elected officials moving forward, I think the discussion we have tonight needs to be a carryover discussion in August. So we are prepped and primed to vote on this in September before we lose the window for federal funding. And I hope that that's the course that we take in moving forward.
Well, I'll just add quickly that the expectations of my citizens are definitely that we run more on a light rail type setting. They don't get this diesel train thing at all, and certainly not in the morning going to Charlotte and in the afternoon coming back. So I think we all, agree with that, and I don't think that will serve us, for the future. But our expectations are pretty high, and I think if this were to move forward, or when it moves forward, we've got to be really clear to them about that. So, as we have more conversations with our own boards and our own citizens, I don't want them to feel sideswiped by that issue. I want them to understand, where this thing is headed, and that schedule piece of it is pretty key. So I just wanted to pass that on from our perspective.
And just to also ask, is this the only piece within the system? And when we're talking the 2030 system plan, is this the only piece that hasn't been updated up to this point? Or are there other pieces that need to be updated as well in order to make sure that the system as a whole is eligible for funding?
So there's one quarter left in that equation. So the extension of the Lynx Blue Line to Town of Pineville and the community of Ballantyne is not the same place as the Gold Line and the Red Line. It is at a more conceptual level planning. We have a locally preferred alternative, but it's not at 30% design. So to advance that project, to get it up to that same level, we would need to do some additional design, engineering, coordinate with the town, coordinate with the development of projects along the way. So it would need what we did at the Silver Line phase, which was like that project definition phase, where you're really getting in the weeds of that locally preferred alternative to set it up for design.
So do you believe that if we do these updates, that the whole system would be 95%, 30% design, at 30% design?
So, well, it's, Silver Line, we're taking that to 15, and we have a, adopted phase approach for that. These are currently, Gold Line and Red are at 30. So this potential future action would just update that design, and that'll take, 18 months to 2 years to do that level of work. And so then you would just march it down the path, each project, these different federal milestones, 65, and then getting a project development, 95. So it'd be hard to give a percent difference as a system, but I think the important part is to just have movement and momentum for each project is how, we would look at it.
So remind us again the cost of this update.
We have a little over $5 million set aside in the FY23 budget that you all passed earlier this year. That is, as we are beginning to lay out the scope of this discussion, we'll be able to refine that cost later.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add, Mayor Washam and Mayor Bales, we've heard very clearly about the interest and need for frequency in that, and that's why Jason mentioned probably one of the, if not the first, one of the series of first items that we will attack in this update is looking at the opportunities to double track and or utilize some side runnings so that we can get that level of frequency from an infrastructure standpoint. And we have to tell you what that looks like. And so that will be the first part of the discussion. Our goal is to meet that expectation, but we have to show you what that requires.
Can I just add that we all know that the reason that we're trying to get to this is that we're going to grow across this county with another 400,000 people every 10 years projected. And so I would hope that what we're talking about isn't just a snapshot of today, but it's the snapshot of what we expect to come, because otherwise we're going to have to start talking about air quality again. And that's why the diesel thing, thank goodness it's changed and how it's working. But again, taking full advantage of what our population projections are, particularly as we go for the additional efforts that we have are going to have to be tied in very closely to this.
Mayor Lyles, this is Bill Thunberg in Mooresville. I want to be sure that you know that we support all of this planning, and we hope that you have this done so that when Mooresville annexes Charlotte, that we'll have a really good transit system when that gets done.
And then you can be mayor, Bill.
Well, I want to add.
Not in my lifetime.
I want to add one thing just publicly that I think we got to touch on. The reality of this project is dependent upon any negotiations that work out with Norfolk Southern. That makes this project real if that could happen. So, you know, that's kind of a caveat, if you will. I know there's a lot of people that want that to happen, but whether it will or not, we don't know the answer to that. So I just want to publicly say that that's a critical component.
Thank you, Mayor Washam. Anyone else in the room with comments? Anyone else online? I just want to say I really appreciate all of course, Mr. Thunberg and all the mayors who have spoken to this issue this afternoon. I really appreciate the comments and the rigorous representation that you bring on behalf of your residents in your respective towns and city. This is so important. I mean, $1.2 trillion in infrastructure dollars out there from the federal government. And we do want that money to come to our community to build out a great transit system for our residents, because it's critical for a good quality of life, for access to affordable housing, for access to jobs, and for all of our environmental priorities. And so I really appreciate the courageous leadership of everybody here to get this right. I appreciate each of you. So thank you. If there are no more comments or questions on that.
I think that Mayor Knox, did you put that in the form of the motion that we would have this discussed at the next agenda, and then it would be coming up for an action item in September?
No, but I can.
Or August? I may be putting words.
No, but I can do that if
Well,
you would
would you
like.
do-
I would ask that after the discussion tonight, we have the opportunity now to discuss this with our respective boards prior to the August meeting, but based on scheduling and everything else, I would prefer this to be on the September schedule as an action item to vote.
I'll second that.
Well, I would say, if I can, forgive me, Madam Chair, this is an information item now, so we cannot take action on it unless we do some other things.
Okay.
I don't know that we need that vote to take place. We hear you loud and clear. It will be on the agenda for information again in August, and then we'll bring it for
An action item
in September.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm happy.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for that. All right, at this time, we have Mr. Lawrence presenting our next item, an action item on temporary service modifications in response to our current transit labor shortage. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello again. So today I want to talk to you about the proposed temporary service modifications that were discussed and previewed earlier. Next slide. So John, Mr. Lewis talked about, the organizational structure. You heard, the RATP Dev representatives talking about our labor issues, local and national, and I'm going to focus in on those service modifications. Next slide. We talked about those labor shortages and providing more oversight. And I think what we have done, very effectively is look at bus service at a very granular level to develop these temporary modified schedules based upon ridership analysis and operator availability. And unfortunately, as we've talked about too, that some of these availability of operators is also impacting our ability to deliver light rail service on our Leaks Blue Line and City Links Gold Line. And so we have some proposed service modifications for those as well. Next slide. Our proposed short-term modified bus service scenario was really looking at all of the runs and the trips that we have to provide each and every day. And what we discovered is that to really make sure that we make service each and every day, we needed to save somewhere around 45 to 50 operators each day to make sure that we can meet the schedules that we are putting out there. And the point of this was to stabilize the system and to improve reliability. And what that led us to was to a proposed adjustment for schedules of 14 local and express routes, some minor adjustments on late night and early morning trips. And I think I'd like to point out that there's no modifications for over 80% of our routes. So we're talking about looking at some different schedules for 20% of our routes. It would save us those 45 to 50 operator positions each and every day. But ultimately what it does, it provides the public with reliable schedule. And so we're not in this issue of canceled and missed trips each day due to operator availability. Next slide. What did that approach look like? We looked at every single route, put all the ridership on every trip and made a chart of it and identified where we had ridership over 20 per trip and 30 per trip. Now, what this means, doesn't mean that there were, 30 people on that entire trip. This is from, let's say, leaving the transit center and maybe going to, out Central Avenue. That's how many people were on that trip throughout. So any given time throughout, you might have 10 or 15 or 20, but the whole trip, you had 20 to 30. And so we evaluated that and did a very surgical analysis to understand where we actually needed additional service and where, if we did modifications, how would it impact that ridership. And one example that you see here is the Route 21. We noticed that, in the early morning and some of the midday, that there are trips over 30 people on each of those trips. And so we have put in additional trips during that time period, but also throughout the day are proposing that we go from 20 to 30. Next slide. Here's an example of looking at, over the course of the trip of the Route 1, where we are seeing, low boardings on the late night trips. We currently have 30-minute frequency all the way to 2 a.m., and we're proposing for those late night trips after 11 to go to 60 minutes. And so with boardings around, 5 or so per trip, we feel that the ridership and the frequency are matched effectively by going to that over the increased headway. Next slide. Route 8 is another example where we looked at across the whole spectrum of the services throughout the trip and saw that only one trip in the inbound portion had more than 20 and then a handful in the midday. And so we feel going from to 20 to 30 does enable us to still provide effective service to the passengers each and every day, but we still don't feel like we'll experience overcrowding with this adjustment. Next slide. So in front of you are the proposed temporary service modifications, but I want to point out, when we talk about, say like the Route 9 going from 10 to 15, we're talking about that weekday frequency from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And you see like routes like 27 from 15 to 30. That doesn't mean that the entire time through that time period will be at that less frequency. But through that ridership analysis, you see there on the notes column, we found opportunities to increase frequency on key trips. Like, for example, on the Route 9, we noticed that there was increased passenger loads between 3:30 and 5:30. And so we went back to the 10-minute frequency during that time period. And you see 6 out of those 11 routes where we are proposing some service reductions, we're adding some level of trips back to improve that frequency, particularly in the sometimes inbound and sometimes outbound direction. So this ridership analysis is something that we're going to be doing more frequently and monitor this, to Chrissy's point, about understanding where we're seeing the frequency needs and the ridership demands. And so we're very pleased with this approach and think this will really help us going forward as we look at service planning in the future. Next slide. We also propose temporary service modifications on some very select trips, like the Route 1, eliminating those very late night trips that have low ridership. The Route 4, just that one trip in the morning. The 11, a handful of trips in the morning and the afternoon. And then the same thing for the Route 12. But I would want to point out, through this process, we're always looking for efficiencies and ways to better service. And we found some efficiencies that we're actually able to implement an improvement of service to the Route 60, which serves the VA hospital from the Tyvola Light Rail Blue Line station. And so we're shifting some of the trips that serve the Jackson Park community to serve the VA hospital. So today, that service operates from 7 to 5 to 6 p.m. at the VA hospital. From 7 to 3, it's every 30 minutes. From 3 to 6, it's every 60. Through these modifications, we'll be able to, that 3 to 6 p.m. time period, increase that frequency to 30 minutes. And that was a direct comment that we heard from many of our customers. And so I'm happy to report that through this analysis, we're able to find some efficiencies to improve service to the VA hospital. Next slide. So we looked at all of our routes, and so what I just showed you was more of our local routes that serve, all day long, weekends, and late night. But we did take a look at our express routes, and maybe pause, click one more slide, and I'll show you the highlight of the slides of the routes that we're looking to improve to. There you go, thank you. So as you see on the right-hand side, there's a number of trips listed for each of these routes. And so when we look at, where we could potentially do some modifications, we We're unable to look at the routes below 63X, just given the number of trips. Those routes are already at somewhere just 30 to 45 minutes in between the trips. But the North Corridor routes had 20-minute frequency for the morning and the afternoon. But looking at the ridership, looking at those very early morning trips and the late night trips and adjusting the schedule, we were still able to maintain a 20-minute frequency period during the times that's listed there on the screen. And we adjusted those running times to accommodate that. And we consolidated a number of trips in those early mornings that we still feel like won't be in a point where we're overcrowding. And certainly, one example is on the Route 63X that serves the Huntersville area. We had a 6:04, a 6:19, and a 6:39 trip. Those were all right around 5 to 10 boardings per trip. We consolidated those trips, shifted one of the 7 o'clock trips to start at 6:30. And the great thing about that is we still are providing that 20-minute frequency during that time period. And we'll be communicating these changes directly with the riders, and I'll have some detail about that in just a moment. Next slide. So additional strategies and next steps as we move through this process. We're working with our CATS Pass app developer to incorporate future on-demand transit services and rideshare companies that we've been speaking of recently. And we're looking at the microtransit zones that was just adopted by this board in May of this year from the Envision My Ride effort for early pilot implementation for on-demand services. As Chrissy mentioned, at the Transit Services Advisory Committee, they approved the service modification strategy, and we have in front of you tonight an action item to approve those service modifications that are temporary. We can implement this service by August 15th, and we're improving the communication on the CATS Pass app for the canceled trips. And schedule changes will remain in place until operator availability improves. And we are scheduling and have some next week public listening sessions and pop-up meetings. Next slide. So I think it was Commissioner Altman who mentioned, could we show an example of the CATS Pass app? And so in front of you is what we're putting out to the public that we started on Monday. If you look at your app today and you look at your stop, you'll either see early, on time, delayed, or scheduled. Scheduled is when it's looking at the future trips. What we do now, we're working with our bus operations and rail divisions to do training to include within that feed that goes into the app to let the app know when there's going to be a canceled trip. And then to let our customers know. So we are still working through and refining this process. We're training all of our operators the people at the bus operations division. And that'll be a really important piece of this as every person is trained up to make sure that we're in this time in a very timely manner. We are in the testing phase for Link's Blue Line Real Time to show up in the app. The Gold Line is already on there. And we're working with, as I stated before, with the app developer to include rideshare companies and on-demand services as part of the trip planning function with this app. Next slide. So we'll be communicating this to the public next week if approved by this board. We have a series of pop-up meetings at each of the park and rides in the North Corridor in Cornelius and Davidson, at North Cross and Huntersville Gateway Park and Rides. We'll be there in person in the morning to show people if this is the trip you're on today, August 15th, this is the trip that you need to take in order to complete your journey. And then also the changes that are occurring in the afternoon. We'll do pop-ups at the Charlotte Transportation Center between 4 and 6 on Wednesday, August 3rd. And we'll do some virtual public meetings at 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. on Thursday, August 4th. And then we'll always do our regular social media postings, our riders alerts. We put the hang tags on the buses. And then where needed, we'll put even information at the local bus stops to communicate this change. Next slide. So recommended path forward, before I give you the action item, we're recommending a temporary adjustment to 20% of our local and express routes, as well as some modifications to light rail service to improve service reliability. On the light rail service, we're proposing to go from 15 minutes to 20 minutes throughout the day, Monday through Sunday. These are based on trip level ridership to lessen the service impact to current passengers. This will provide transit users a consistent and reliable schedule to plan their travel each and every day. And as operator availability improves, we'll also be able to add trips back in as needed. And the great thing about this communication we've been doing with our bus operations division, that canceled trip works both ways. So as we cancel trips, and if we're able to add service back in, then we can uncancel those trips in the app. And so that's an important piece of the communication that we'll need to push forward to the public. So to you, on the next slide, our recommended action is to approve temporary light rail and bus schedule modifications to match operator availability in order to improve service reliability. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
I've got a question, John Higdon from Matthews. First of all, I appreciate the surgical and data-based approach on determining which routes to adjust. So I have two questions. Were any routes, I didn't hear this, but were any routes totally canceled?
No service has been cut or removed as a part of this. All this is done is modifying schedules to improve reliability.
So that worker that has to get to work may have to get up a little earlier, but they still have a pathway to get to work.
Well, only on 20% of the routes, so 80% of the routes, the routes that are, more than 30-minute frequency, we are making no adjustments to those routes.
And the other question I have is, do you know, you talked about real-time technology, and Mr. Smith from RATP Dev mentioned the technology that Uber has. If you order an Uber and it says your driver's named John and he's 5 miles away and you can see him coming, is that something that you guys are looking at?
So I want to just make sure a point of correction, that if you look at our app today, we do have real-time availability on our bus app and on the CityLinks Gold line. And we're doing, through this whole effort of improving the data into the app, we've been working very closely with the bus operations divisions to improve the reliability of our automatic vehicle location and the repairs and maintenance of those to improve how they report into the app. So you can open the app today and you can look right outside the window and see when buses are coming, and you'll see them move down the street.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I do have a couple of questions, Melinda Bales, Huntersville. In regards to the 48 and the 63, I had Mr. Roberts ask the question, how many riders were going to be displaced? Especially that 5:57 and that 6:16 timeframe. And I have not gotten an answer. Do we know how many riders we currently have on those two lines for 48?
Yeah, those early morning trips were somewhere around, the earliest was around 5 passengers boarding that trip, and then up to around 10 to 11 on the others. But part of that communication would be, hopefully people can adjust their schedules to take that, that we're taking that 5, I think it was the early 6 a.m. trip, could take that 6:34 trip that we adjusted it to. And our communication to the public will be to put both those schedules in front of them, and so they can clearly understand the adjustments that we've made.
Okay, I think that's the 6:26 trip, at least that's what the
It might be,
email
that's,
said.
yeah.
However, so one of the things that you did state was that you were going to do some public engagement from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. If they're riding the 5:57, they're not going to get that opportunity to have that communication.
We'll be sure to be there before the first trip,
Please.
for sure.
I
And
greatly
why
appreciate
we're
that.
in the morning, we found the express customers are, when they get off in the afternoon, they just want to get in their car. They've been talking to people all day long. That morning is the best time really to catch people, to give them the feedback. And if we need to go out the week after that, if we didn't catch enough people, then we'll certainly do that again.
I just want to make sure if we are going to modify the schedule, that we don't forget that those 5 folks that are riding the 5:57, and make sure that they know that it's the 6:26 for them moving forward for a while.
Absolutely. We'll be there before the service starts.
I wanted to follow up to the mayor's comments about that, because I think this is the time to really showcase the customer service and the information. I don't know if this is a deck that you could identify something, you could do it in a good way of saying, there are 5 people that ride this bus on a website or somehow like that, to make sure that they get that, or however, but I really think that first week is so key to making sure that people feel like you've heard them. So I don't know if that's a person, but I don't know if the town's website should, kind of have this deck to say these times are changing, and I don't know that. I look at the manager and he's like, okay. But I just think whatever we can do that would put this out in the public domain would be really helpful. You probably know the 5 people that are out there at 5 a.m. in the morning, or maybe, take a picture at 5 a.m. in the morning of who's out there, and just make sure that one of them, because if one, they know each other by now. Whatever it takes. I just really think after this dip that we've had, let's not let that happen. Let's make this one where we're out over communicating. not just communicating, over-communicating. And if that means a person or whatever for a while, let's just do our very best to do this.
I appreciate that, Mayor, and I would say, please get with our staff, and we can put that out there through our social media and on our website, just to make sure that we want to be excellent partners as well as we communicate to our residents.
Absolutely. And we have, through our various planning studies, have great relationships with all the public information officers from each town, and we'll continue that into, Mayor Lyles, to your point. I think that we'll have people out there the first week, too, of that 15th. And I think that too often we communicate when we're making a change and not that continuous communication. So we'll be doing that in the first couple weeks to make sure people are okay for the early trips that aren't there, for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. Any other questions in the room?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, if you can just provide us specifically with what communication you want going out from the towns. That way, we're not crafting anything, we can just cut and paste and just send it on.
Absolutely. We have riders alerts and a lot of communication already ready. And I think what would be good to do, like probably a roundtable with your PIOs to communicate that out. We'll certainly schedule that. Thank you, Andrew.
Any comments from people attending virtually?
Oh, this is Chrissy Exlin with TSAC. I had a couple questions. So do you have a preference list on which service gets restored first? So as you hire 3 operators, like which route's going to get its trips restored first?
So I think what we'll do is, this ridership analysis that we've done and completed is just evaluate this on a weekly basis, see where we're seeing increased ridership, and that would really develop the priority list and see where we're seeing improvements. We may see increased ridership on routes that weren't impacted by this change with the greater reliability. So I think we'll want to take that holistic approach to look at all the routes.
Okay, and then I think going back to the communication, I agree with Mayor Lyles, like this is the time to over-communicate, because I was just looking at like the example of Route 1, it's going from a 30 to 60-minute headway at night. If somebody shows up and they have to wait an hour at 11 p.m., I mean, that's a bummer, to put it mildly. So, I mean, like plaster every stop, like along that route needs to have signs plastered to it. And going on that, the list of public meetings, I think there was like 2 hours at CTC. It should be all day. Like someone should be there with a booth, like the Charlie Brown advice booth, for the whole time that CTC is open for like at least several days, because I mean, a 2-hour window, you're not going to get almost anybody, especially because it's morning and evening where some of the changes are. So, in the middle of the afternoon, you're going to miss people. I'm just picturing like, it's really going to affect people when the headway cuts in half, or doubles, I guess I should say. That's going to be a big problem if people don't know. I'm wondering if you'll do any analysis on like the elasticity of ridership. So if you double headways, are you going to lose half the riders? Or if you lose less than half the riders, then it's not as elastic. Like, I'm just curious if there will be any analysis on that.
So I think that's exactly the ridership analysis I was talking about. See how the population of ridership reacts to these changes and see what, if we're seeing shifts. We did that during the pandemic where we saw almost a leveling out of same level of ridership throughout the day. And then we really noticed when people started coming back to work, particularly on the blue line, our peaks came back. And so I believe through this will continue that ridership analysis to determine that.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just writing. And then I guess going back, sorry, and I wrote all my questions kind of in random order. My last comment was that with the list of changes that gets communicated, like not along each route, but in a central location, the CAT's website or whatever, I'm really hoping it will be like the list that you've shared with us, not like, hey, hey, riders, check your schedule for your bus. It might have changed, but like literally, these are the things that have changed because someone's going to look for their route and see it's not on there and be like, okay, good, mine's not getting cut. I looked at that to see, okay, the 9 and the 16, all right, bummer for me, but at least it's reliable and predictable. So just like, again, the over-communicating, putting that list, because that's, it gave me confidence that you did a real surgical analysis to see this very specific list, and I can't imagine why not share that with the public.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chrissy. And I think what's important to note is sometimes we think about people as they only ride one route, but our people ride and transfer throughout the entire system. So it's important for everybody to know those changes. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Jason, I want to thank you and your team for doing this. I think at the end of the day, there are two people that ride the bus, those that choose to ride the bus and those that need to ride the bus. And I think looking at this holistically, the way it was done is outwardly appears to be the least impactful that we could do to get the best result. And I thank you for that. But again, I'll reiterate the same thing that everybody else has said, and Chrissy, you said it last. Messaging is crucial on this. I think as the media has jumped all over the deficiency in bus drivers and everything else, I hope the media embraces the fact that we have worked to create an environment that still provides a quality product for those people that choose and those people that need the services that we provide.
Thank you, Mayor Knox. Anybody online, any virtual comments?
Yes, Ms. Office, Anthony Roberts, Huntersville. Just a quick favor or question of Jason and John. If you would just send the number of impacted riders for each of those segments that you're eliminating. I know you're adding back in, you're eliminating 3, adding back in 1, et cetera, but could you send the, sort of exact numbers on impacts if it's 5, 3 riders, 10 riders, whatever?
Absolutely, Anthony, we can do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions online? All right, at this time, would anyone like to propose a motion? Put a motion on the floor to adjust the local and express routes as well as the Blue Line service levels in order to improve service reliability system-wide.
I'll make that motion. John Higdon Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor Higdon. Do I hear a second?
Second, Mayor Knox.
Thank you, Mayor Knox. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? And the motion passes. We have one more item listed under the MTC Commissioner's business, and that is a follow-up to the discussion the board entertained last month in regard to the format of MTC meetings now that the governor's executive order on COVID-19 is slated to expire in the next several weeks. As you all know, the executive order allowed government entities to modify their public meeting formats to allow social distancing during the health crisis. With the imminent expiration of the order, I'd like to discuss our options moving forward. Once again, I will ask CATS attorney Brad Thomas to give us an update on the legal path we need to consider moving forward. Brad?
Sure, thank you. Madam Chair, you described it correctly that the governor's order is set to expire August 15th. And so that was the legal authority that allowed us to do the virtual meetings. And so, given that legal authority will expire in August 15th, we recommend that our next meeting be in person. I know the city attorney's office is working on some guidance on this, knowing that, it's possible that a lot of towns and cities are going to want to have a virtual component. And so we expect that guidance to be sometime around August 15th. So we could share that at the next MTC meeting as well.
Thank you, Brad. For the legal opinion, I will now open the floor for discussion from MTC members. Anyone want to speak to this?
This is Mayor Knox, and I, for one, am glad that we are back in person. I think it's time, and for me, it's nice to know that I've got one day a month where I can come and eat, and my wife doesn't know what I'm actually eating, so.
This is Vi Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte, and I find the in-person meetings to have a much better dialogue. I hear a comment and I feel, and not that I can't do this virtually, but it certainly does require more attention, and the interaction to me is very important. This entire effort that this group has made to be able to collaborate, to exchange information readily, to trust the conversations that we're having, that means a lot to me. And to me, that happens when you have the ability to see each other, get the, as my daughter tells me, my social clues from what my eyes are saying and what my eyes are, what my face is expressing. All of that is important to me. So I would hope that whatever we do is not something that avoids that. I really want us to continue to be in a place that the relationships grow deeper, as well as the information and the work that we do for our communities. So that's where I am.
Mayor Lyles?
I'm done.
Thank you, Mayor Lyles. Anybody else in the room? How about online?
This is Mayor Bales. I would just like to jump in and say, this is my first meeting with the MTC in person. I have appreciated being able to sit and have honest dialogue around the issues. I think that being in person is very important. I think that there is a way for us to do this and do it safely. So my preference would be that we make every effort to be in person.
Thank you, Mayor Bales. Anybody online or anyone else in the room?
Can I add one other thing,
Yes.
Madam Chair? I know that there are many people that attend this meeting because they're helping or seeing the future. When you look at our regional partners, Gastonia, Mayor Walker, Mayor Dirch would usually have come in person, but I would not want to eliminate that as an option. But the voting members of this board are the ones that have to carry the, I was going to say burden, but I'm going to say opportunity for decision-making. And I would say that we ought to make sure that we have the ability for the folks that we want to grow and want to participate in this, the opportunity to do so. But that will require some rulemaking about who those people are. Is it the other mayors across what footprint? Is it our regional connect boundaries that we follow? That does need some thought if that's what we're going to try to do to allow them to attend virtually.
I totally agree with you, Vi. I think that's a really good point. And even us voting folks, I mean, our intent is to be here, but there could be issues that would prevent us from doing that. I'm not asking to be able to vote because I've got a backup here with my manager, so we could be communicating on that. But to be able to watch and stay up to date, I think is critical if we have to.
Yeah.
So I agree with you.
Mayor Washam, I agree with you. I mean, I feel that the in-person is so much more productive, but I would never want to exclude the ability of people to participate. So I hope that, everybody will continue to make every effort now that we can be in person to be in person, but to not exclude those who are available to come in remotely. I would never want to exclude that because, we all get sick, we all have family emergencies, and this is important work, and I want to have every voice at the table when that's possible. So I think at this point, we are not voting. We're just going to have staff come back to us at the August MTC meeting with several options for us to consider based upon the feedback that you all have given. So if I'm correct in that, then I will simply say and ask, is there any other business for us to consider tonight?
Madam Chair, one last question I wanted to, I know during the RATP Dev portion of the discussion, we had expected that we would have their PowerPoint deck. We had some technical difficulties. We do have that, and we'll send it out to board members tomorrow.
Great.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. If there is no more business for us tonight, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I do have one comment. Did we not vote at a previous meeting that you have to be here in person, correct? So in our August meeting, is it the expectation that even those non-voting members have to be here?
You can make a motion accepting if there's a member that votes, that you can actually, the council or the board would have to vote to allow that person to take part and to vote.
if they can't be here for another reason?
I think we need to find out.
I'm just trying to set the stage, because is the expectation everybody's going to be here, or you
Yeah, I
can't
think-
participate at the next meeting because the governor's order will be expired?
Right, I think the crucial thing is, because as you said, the next meeting, the governor's order would be expired. And so for purposes of voting and establishing a quorum, we would want everyone to be in person, because you would run the risk of that action, being challenged, so.
And does that stand also for non-voting members?
I think that, we could entertain a virtual option for folks that want to provide public comment or that are a non-voting. I think
Okay.
that option is without, the risk that would be associated with the voting.
Decision.
So I think that's something you could do.
But can we do that without voting and putting that in place? I would envision the next meeting, that would need to be on the agenda for for voting members to vote upon. Would we not need that?
I think it would be a good idea to define the parameters as you said, so it's clear that, how someone can participate virtually. So there's no question about that.
So I think what I am hearing from board members, certainly for the next meeting, that we would continue with the current requirement that voting members be here in person. And if they can't, they have their alternates who would be here in person. But for non-voting members and for emergency situations, we would have a hybrid option that would allow non-voting members and voting board members who will not vote because they're not here to be able to at least participate in questions, et cetera. If I get kind of consensus that that's it, that'll be the item we prepare for action in August.
At the beginning of the meeting,
At the
so that we
beginning of
can
the
go
meeting.
ahead, and that doesn't preclude us from making adjustments longer term, but we know where we are for the next month. Great.
Thank you.
I think that's a great idea.
That sounds good to me as well. All right, any other matters? At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. If there was one, I didn't hear it.
I don't think you have to have a vote on adjournment.
I'll make a motion. Mayor Washington.
All right, all those in
He's
favor?
already left, so.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Aye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
My bag all the way into the table. All right. Tell me you're ready to go without telling me you're ready.